anyone and everyone. Welcome to Have You Heard About This Case? My name is Sam, and I am here with my sister Ash.
Hello.
We are finally doing the long-awaited part 2 of Songs Inspired by Crime. I had a lot of fun with it. I know, Ashley, you weren't in that one.
Yeah.
But we recorded that with Insane Investigations, and it was such a fun episode to do. So I'm very
Yeah, I
excited.
love listening to it.
Yeah, this is one of those, like, I've been waiting way too long to get back to, and now I'm just like, now I'm in a groove. I just want to do this a lot, but I'll space them up a
Yeah,
bit.
and I think I have some more song ideas, so it's probably going to be like parts 3 to 50. There'll be more.
Yeah, I want more. This is a fun topic to discuss.
Yeah.
But we're gonna start off by doing a song that's essentially piggybacking off of the last episode. So we discussed the Edmund Fitzgerald. So we're gonna do Gordon Lightfoot's "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald,"
which isn't necessarily a crime, but it's a true story.
It's a true story, and there's a lot of
It may be a crime.
there's a lot of speculation about culpability.
Yes.
Which I discussed a little bit in the episode, but it's been fairly well disproven from my research, so I didn't go too deep into it. But when the song came out, it was still like they didn't know what happened. They didn't know if it was human error or not.
Right.
So yeah, it's kind of crime, but it's tragic history. I think still kind of
that's
fits
a
in
better
the category.
definition. Yeah, tragic history.
And this is a song that we grew up with. We listened to this a lot when we were kids.
I think you had to, living anywhere near in the Great Lakes region.
Yeah, well, and Dad he was a fan. I tried calling him earlier, but we got sidetracked. But he's like, I remember the song coming out. Like, that was a big deal.
Right.
So, yeah, we definitely had this. And I think we just talked about shipwrecks when we were kids. It's fascinating.
Well, yeah. It was like things that affected our family directly with the stories of things like the city of Bangor and the John Jacob Astor.
Yep.
Being like so near a place that we vacationed frequently. It was just something that we found fascinating.
Exactly. And Dad has always had a big fascination with shipwrecks. I remember he was always talking about, like, one thing he'd love to do is scuba dive shipwrecks.
Right. And I've always thought that was cool too, but I forget the word for it. There's a word of fear of things underwater.
Yeah. I know.
And I think you
kind of
have
deal
that.
with that. I find that so cool.
I find it's cool, but I don't want to like be near it. Like just swimming under a dock freaks me out. So the idea of going underwater with, you might have like the most trained or like the best equipment possible, but the fact that you could not lose air because you're dependent on like something else, and you're like in something. Like I've seen people like swim into like the galley and the other areas of these ships. Not necessarily this one, but that is the biggest fear for me. Like, no.
See, what's funny to me is I agree with you. Swimming under a dock is terrifying. But if I know I'm going with a trained professional, like I have this opportunity, I want to go down there. I think I'd be terrified, but I think I would do it.
Well, good for you. I don't think I can. We were not scuba diving, but we were snorkeling.
Yeah, no, you're not a fan
Mexico.
of snorkeling.
I'm not good at it. I breathe wrong and I suck water in. Bad things happen. But there was a cenote, which is like a big hole basically in the earth, and there's usually super clear, beautiful water and caves down there, and they're very common in Mexico. So we're in this cenote, and then there's a cave that you go underwater. It was like literally inches, and you pop up at another cenote. And the whole group was with a tour guide, and we're like, okay, so you're gonna go underwater. I'm just gonna guide your head into the hole, so you don't even have to look if you're afraid, and you're gonna pop up in like 18 inches. Like it is like not the length of your body even. You're just gonna swim through this hole. I couldn't do it. They left me in the first cenote by myself.
That's scary though. Like,
yeah, I did not like it. Like the whole, like it was a group of 20 people. They all swam through this hole, and they're like, okay, well, if you're not going to go through, you're just going to stay in this other cavern in the ground by yourself.
Right.
For some reason, I chose cavern by myself.
That's fine. You know your limits.
Yeah, no, I was fine.
But yeah, let's go ahead and get into the song. I figured we'd kind of just break down the lyrics, and kind of discuss it with everything that we discussed in the last episode, which I know you're just familiar on the history of the Fitzgerald. Yes. So it starts with him singing about Lake Superior, and he uses the Chippewa name, Gitchagumi.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful name.
It is a beautiful name, and it translates to big sea or huge water, which I feel like is a kind of exact picture of what Lake Superior is.
Yeah, 100%.
And he paints this picture in your head of how treacherous Lake Superior could be by saying, she never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. And I know me and you, we've seen Superior in November and how terrifying it can be.
Right.
That's
it's
very
amazing.
accurate.
I'm close enough where if I hear about a storm coming in, I will get in my car and drive the hours to get there and usually meet the storm just to watch it because of how cool it is.
It's really cool. If anyone has that opportunity, I recommend it. Like, stay safe and inside.
Yeah.
But it's really cool.
It is very cool.
He then goes into talking about the freighter. He says, with a load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. So it's really kind of getting that picture in your head of how loaded this freighter was.
And while it does say 26,000 tons more, I think that's almost deceiving, saying that it's not more than it should have taken. That's just 26,000 tons more than empty.
Yeah, it was fully loaded, and there was some debate whether it was potentially too loaded, but I think that they've kind of come to the conclusion that, like, it was at its max.
Right. I did hear a good description once saying that it was overloaded for the seas that it was in.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
Because, like, on any other day, that is absolutely a normal load. But when there was, like, the possibility of storms, it might have been a better idea to have less. But again, it's one of those things we'll never really know.
Yeah, and also it was the biggest freighter at the time on the Great Lakes.
Right. It's not like there's a calculation for this size ship takes this much and this kind of gale.
Mm-hmm.
Like that. It was just a guessing game, an educated guessing game.
Exactly. And he lets us know that it departed from a mill in Wisconsin, and that, again, as we were just kind of saying, is one of the largest freighters, but it had a seasoned crew and captain. And
yes,
we learned Captain Mascorley, who was the captain of the Fitzgerald in the last episode, he had been a captain for 44 years. And
yeah, so he knows his stuff.
He knew his stuff, and this was actually going to be his last trip. He was retiring after this one trip.
That is just so tragic to me.
It's so sad.
Yeah.
And I believe a lot of the crew that he was working with is people that he had been with for many years. So they all knew how to work, like, synergistically. I think that shows how bad the storm was.
Right. And like you think of, a ship, limited space, and they're on it for weeks to months at a time. They have to work well together on every aspect of it, on running the ship, on cooking your meals, on not slapping each other silly when you're playing card games. These people knew each other very well.
Exactly. And then he kind of goes into the journey of the storm. He sings about the waves crashing on the deck and the crew and the captain kind of having this moment of realization that they're experiencing the Witch of November.
Yeah.
Which I didn't really talk about in the last episode, but the Witch of November is a term that is used to describe the really vicious and violent storms in Superior in November. And it's usually like a 10-day period. And it's typically a little later from when the Edmund Fitzgerald sank. It's mid to late November typically. And
yeah, like today is the 17th, and I think this is like the start of it.
Exactly.
Generally. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because even in my home now, which I am hours from Superior, but the winds are whipping right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is when, like, generally where you are and way up into the UP and stuff, you really start to see your first snow, and you're getting that cold weather front coming in and clashing with the warm weather from the fall, which is what creates those storms.
Exactly.
And then he concludes the verse with, in the face of a hurricane west wind, kind of what you were just saying, like that intense wind that just comes in, the warm wind that's hitting the cold that's coming from Canada and just clashing.
Yeah, because the wind we have right now it's weird. I guess not weird because it happens every year, but every year it still feels weird to me. It's like a hot wind. Mm-hmm. Like the cold air, like when it's not windy, like earlier today, it wasn't windy at all. It was like 35 degrees. But then I stepped outside just a little bit ago and you're hitting like 50 mile, or not 50 mile an hour, fast winds, but they're like 45 to 50 degrees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have that. We've had that in Chicago for the last like week or two as well, where I walk outside, I'm like, this actually feels good. This feels nice.
It's a weird feeling. Yeah. Like you go outside thinking that you're going to get hit with like icy wind, but no, it's weird.
Yeah, and like right where I'm in Chicago, it's like year long Lake Michigan. And I'm used to walking out and having like bitter cold wind hitting me from Lake Michigan. And it's like, oh, this is refreshing. I like this.
Yeah.
But then Gordon Lightfoot gives us a look into what is happening with the crew on the ship, saying that it is dinner time, but the storm is too rough to be able to cook. And it's kind of giving that like insight of like these guys are just kind of stranded there. There's nothing they can really do.
Yeah, because like trying to like stir a pot of stew on the stove. Imagine that when your stove is moving. Like,
and it's gonna be all on the floor in a second.
Yeah. Buttered bread for dinner, fellas.
Right. And then he says at 7 p.m. the main hatchway caved in. I'm kind of interpreting this as one of the containers with the iron ore pellets when he says hatchway, but I'm honestly not too sure.
I don't like I'm just kind of looking at the lyrics while you're going through it. I remember hearing that thinking maybe it was just a visualization that I put in my own head, but I thought it was like a hatchway of like the area where they were sitting, like the galley
maybe.
or the like the bedroom area, and then that was the hatchway that they used to go up and down.
That could be.
So maybe I am picturing a bunch of guys like huddled down in the room, and then like they're safe, and then all of a sudden that gave out,
like a
and the water's
bulkhead
coming in where they're sitting,
type of thing.
Yeah, like the door in the beginning of Twister that sucked the dad out. That's what I'm picturing.
Okay, I'm there with you.
Okay, yeah.
But then he goes into the crew realizing that they might not survive. And one of the crew members says, fellas, it's been good to know ya. So they're having this kind of moment of...
Gotta imagine that.
Right? It feels like it's a moment of realization of what's going to happen to them, but also kind of a moment of calm.
But like you said, these guys are experienced. It's not like they're not sure what's going to happen.
Exactly.
They know.
They know the situation that they're in. But then he goes to talk about the captain realizing that water is coming in. And later that night, when the lights went out
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Later that night, when his lights went out, the sign came from the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And that's really him just signifying that, like, it's gone. The lights went out. It went below the water. Which is just sad. And I was talking to Dad about this. I didn't include this in my script, but it's kind of a side note. We were talking about the Anderson, which is that second ship that was following 10 miles behind them.
Yeah.
What would their pathing have looked like? Would they potentially have basically gone right over the wreckage without realizing it?
I mean, I feel like they very well could have.
Yeah.
I
know this is a little tangent from the song, but Dad and I had a very interesting conversation yesterday about it.
How would they have known where it was? Because the entire thing went down. It's not like it broke on the surface. It went down. It was said to have broke underneath.
Well,
so
they could have broken on the surface. They don't know that.
I guess, they wouldn't have known.
There's actually, I think there's more theories with it breaking on the surface than it actually breaking underwater.
Oh, okay. I've heard that it was underwater, but that was probably just like one thing I've read, but that I didn't read into it at the depths that you did. But there was, like, you think of like when you throw a stick out on Superior and there's waves, even with like light waves along the shore, you can't even see that stick.
Yeah, and these waves were 35 feet tall, which was
Yeah.
taller than the
So
ship itself, I
if your
think, from what's
piece,
sticking out.
yeah, because I don't know how tall what they call from like the water level to the highest point. There's a term for it, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I'd be
Actually have a
curious to see what
ship
that
book.
would have been. Yeah, there's all kinds
Exactly.
of cool ship terms.
I say I literally have a ship manual in front of me. I have
Oh
mom's
yeah,
ship manual.
the ship manual. Yes, God, that has been in our childhood forever. But the like if the ship say broke on surface, if the piece is less than 35 feet, that like if any debris piece, then it would have been like absolutely sucked in, and you wouldn't see it unless like it
And
was
in
to
the
the
weather
birth of
and
one
the
of the waves.
dark.
Yeah, and like obviously there wasn't any lights on it. Like it was sinking. If they did see it mid sink, even.
Well, this is kind of my theory with if the situation is accurate, that the Anderson could have come close to the path or directly over the path of where the Edmund Fitzgerald was and where it would have sank. If Because the theory is there's two main wave theories that would have potentially caused it to crack on the surface. That is like kind of the most common. One is a wave that came up directly in the center of the ship, which left the bow and the stern kind of floating
Teetering.
above, where that
Yep.
the weight could have cracked it in half.
Right.
And then the second theory is waves came up on the bow and the stern and left the center kind of floating.
And either way, because if it was taking on water and the pellets, the ore pellets on the inside, were shifting due to the water that was moving around on the inside,
Exactly.
then if all the pellets were either in the center or on the side, one side versus the other, and a wave came and pulled that wrong side out and the heavy side was left hanging out in air, absolutely that would have seen a way to crack it in half. That makes perfect sense.
And Captain Miscorley had told the Anderson that he had a list. So those iron
Yes.
pellets were in all likelihood massively shifting. But
Yeah,
also,
we knew they were moving.
one of the other theories, which also would have sped up, because like if it broke in half on the surface, that would have sped up it actually sinking. But another theory that where it could have broken on the floor of the lake is that that center wave came up and the bow tipped down, it kind of turns into like a missile going straight down into the water,
Yeah.
and it would have like sucked it in once that bow got fully submerged. And that's
That's
the other
a
theory.
story. Yeah, I think that's the one theory I read. So I didn't hear the other theory, which actually now that you described the other one, that makes more sense to me. Obviously, I'm not a ship's like scientist, whatever. But the theory I remember hearing was that the nose went down and it like missiled to the ground, and then the undertow of the waves, because the waves
Yeah.
are a full cycle. That's what split it in half, like mid between the shore or the top of the water to the bottom of the water. There was like the cyclone, and that like twisted it.
Yeah. Because also if you look at the photos of the wreckage, I think it's the back half is upside down.
Yes, and that's what I remember hearing is the twisting thing, is that that's how that happened.
Yeah, that would make sense.
But if it broke on the surface and it started going down, it probably was spiraling going down too. So
Exactly.
like, either way.
I'll say, yeah, there's still a lot of mystery with it. But I just
Yeah.
thought that was an interesting side conversation I had after releasing that episode with Dad.
Yes. And part of that too, I don't want to like go too tangenty, but the shipping lanes are miles wide. So while they might have been in the same shipping lane, they might have not been within the same like either 1 mile, half mile path.
Exactly.
The line of sight when you're on these boats, I haven't been on one myself, but I've seen videos because I can't stop watching these videos of like the North Sea and all this stuff.
Oh,
They're
me
freaking
too.
Fascinating.
I
Oh my
love
God.
them.
But they're only seeing like a path that is maybe a quarter mile wide with like really powerful modern lights.
Yeah.
So this shipping lane might have been
Could be
like
10
well on
miles
a
in
map
the-
it looks like, but they are just right there. They might have been 10 miles north or south or east or west.
Yeah.
I guess in this case it would be east or west. So like they might have been linearly like right above it, but it would have been like 5 miles north of them.
I will say I have been on a ship in the middle of the night. I was on an overnight ferry once, and you can't see anything. That was calm waters. But like I was up on the upper deck at like midnight, just kind of like looking out, and you see nothing.
Yeah.
And that was
Well,
a
it is not
beautiful,
comparable.
clear night. Like,
Right. Yeah.
I didn't
You
have
don't
the
see these things.
factors of what was happening here.
Yeah. Like that's not comparable at all, but I have been on small boats, like 12-foot little John boats, looking for people when as a firefighter, like a first responder. So if there's like a canoe overturned or something and we're looking for them, they're not making any noise because we weren't sure if they were alive or not. The story ended up good. We found a guy, he was safe and he's good. But when you're looking for somebody in the water, you're in a very small boat, you're going very slow, trying to not make waves, and you're shining a light like down off the side of the boat, like a flashlight at the level of the water, trying to see like differences in the water, either something floating or a wave. And this is a tiny little boat in a tiny little lake that's like maybe a 10-acre lake.
Yeah, so you don't
that's
have
hard
the
to see.
current, you don't have
Yeah.
like all that stuff. Yeah. Like our two different experiences are nothing in comparison, but it gives us some insight into how bad this would have been because it was bad in our like good weather and everything.
Yes. So in conclusion, I believe that the odds of them going above the ship are rare in the fact that the space was so big and we don't know exactly if they were directly above it. But if they were, we wouldn't have known.
Exactly. The ship.
Yes.
Oh, okay. So he goes into the mystery a little bit, and he's basically starts off saying like they almost made it to safe harbor. They only had, I think it was about 15 miles to go, and that they might have split or capsized, and or be taken by the water is how he kind of puts it. Really, just kind of addressing like we don't really know what happened.
Right. Yeah, because they may have split. They may have broke deep. The remains and the faces of the names, all of that is a mystery, and that's what he's getting at there.
Exactly. And my next line in my script, he says in there, all that remains are the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. And that, like, that's just so tragic.
Yeah, so all that we know for sure is the names, those faces, the sad part of it, but we won't know what happened.
Exactly. And then he refers to the ship at the bottom of Lake Superior as rooms of her ice water mansion, which is haunting but beautiful.
Ooh, yeah.
I love that line. And we mentioned this a little bit earlier, just kind of with the weather, but Superior is such a cold lake.
Yes.
And I know Lauren and I talked about it a little bit when we covered the ghost ship of Northumberland Strait. But that water is so cold, it has the ability to essentially preserve a body.
Yes.
And you and I have watched
actually know about
documentaries. Yeah, you and I have kind of, I haven't looked into it, but you have more information just based on your medical background of just in general what you do. But there's been divers and submersibles that have gone in to these shipwrecks, and we've watched documentaries where it kind of shows us what a body looks like. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's something called adipocere, which is like it's soap. So when the body is underwater, the fat solubles, because we all know from Fight Club, human fat makes great soap. So the body with the cold air or cold water is basically preserved, and the soap is made from the fat and it's preserved. I forget the name of the ship it is, but there is one ship. So I thought
There's another ship in
had to have been
Superior. Yeah, you and I were watching this documentary together.
Yeah,
and I don't
and it's
remember
like
the name
captain,
either.
I wish I remembered. But he's like in the ship and he's floating upright within one of these compartments. It might have been like the wheelhouse or something. But divers have gone down there and he's just like floating around, but he is in an upright position. So it looks like he's walking around the ship, and it is absolutely haunting. They have since kind of made this into a preserve because this is literally his gravesite. And like, they don't want him disturbed. But he was down there for the longest time. And I think it's almost like kind of comforting. Like he stayed there because, the captains stay with their ship and he's still protecting it.
Yeah, I wish I
There
could remember the
you
name
can
too,
Google
but like it was a
Yeah.
YouTube thing that we like stumbled on.
Yeah, I remember watching that and I'm like, I feel so wrong watching this because like you can see him in these images. Like it's
Yeah,
not
it
hard
felt
to
weird
see
that it was
all.
like we just YouTubed it and saw
Yeah.
it. Like it feels it's one of those things that like kind of I think for you and me, we're both interested in the science and learning about it, but we have the realization like this is a human.
Yeah, it's definitely a person. God, I wish I remember the name of that ship. I'm trying to like Google it.
If we think of it, I'll put it in our show notes.
Yeah.
But then he concludes the song talking about the memorial for the crew that was lost and ringing the bell 29 times for each life that was lost, and that their
Yes.
story will always be remembered.
Yep.
Which is a beautiful way to end it.
Yeah, and the original bell is currently at the Whitefish Point Museum. And then they replaced it with another bell underwater, so the ship does still have a bell on it. But the original one, I was at the Whitefish Point Museum to go see it.
I've never been there.
But the museum was closed when I got there, so I looked at it through the window.
I think that's the only thing that they took. I think everything else still's down
Yes.
there.
Yes, and they did replace it, so that like it feels complete down there. And it wasn't done without consulting like all of the family members of the decedents on the ship, and they all okayed it.
Which is
And
great.
they do ring it, I think, on the anniversary.
They
I
just
wanna
did.
say.
I was reading when I was doing my research because my episode came out right after the anniversary, and I was reading about an event that they were having at the museum where the museum was closed for the day, and it was just for like the family to come in, and it was like a memorial ringing of it on the anniversary.
Yeah. The Kamloops, by the way, SS Kamloops.
Yes, that sounds right.
Yeah, and they call the gentleman in there Old Whitey. 'Cause
That's
he's all
right.
white from that episode. So okay, it just kind of I was Googling and then I looked away and I went down. It was like the next entry in Google, so I saw it.
Yeah, that was definitely a really interesting because it was I think it was like a submersible, like a little robot that we were watching go down there.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on the song, just in general?
The song is haunting, and it has those certain lines in there, like you say, the mansion underwater, and the faces and names, and the hatch breaking. Like it gives me such imagery, and I think that's what resonated with so many people, and why the song is still so popular.
Yeah.
And I really don't know how it feels outside of the Great Lakes region, but I'd like to say that it's not just here. I feel like that people all over the country know this song.
Yeah, I would hope so. It's hard for us to tell because we're so close
Yeah, right.
to it. But yeah, no, I agree. And I think overall he's told the story in a very accurate way. He took some liberties singing about not being able to make dinner. Like we don't know that, but that added that emotion to it. That
And it was like a midday wreck.
it's like
well, it
like
does
7
feel
p.m. Yeah, it was like right
Yeah,
after dinner.
Yeah, all the images that you see are very dark, but that's obviously because of the storm. So they very well might have been exactly what happened.
Yeah, and I think it really, and I kind of said this a little earlier, to me, specifically when it comes to like that dinner line, it really makes me think about that they just were stuck. There's nothing that they could do other than just try to keep going and make it through. And to me, that's what that dinner line kind of tells me is like the position that they're in.
Yep.
But overall, I love the song. It's nostalgic, but it's very emotional and tells a great story. But it's sad.
Yeah.
And for everyone as well, I have a Spotify playlist of all of our different episodes. Well, now these 2 episodes with the songs that we cover. So I'll add this as well to it with our next songs that we'll discuss. So you can go listen to all of that. And I'll link them all in our show notes for YouTube if you prefer that. But let's go ahead and dive into our next songs. They are actually a trilogy. So the next three
Oh,
are from the same artist, but they all tell kind of a different variation of a story that will be wrapped up at the very end of the third one.
okay.
And when I
And I
was,
haven't heard any of these, so
I'm
this is pretty
so
exciting.
excited for this because I love these songs and I know that you will.
Nice.
And when I was doing my research for our first episode on songs about crime, I saw these songs on a ton of different lists when I was just trying to pick out which ones I wanted to discuss. And at the time, I passed them up because I just hadn't listened to much of this artist yet. And now I'm like a huge fan. So I'm like, we have to do them now. Those lists were right. I should have talked about them. And as I was just kind of saying, these three songs tell a story, but there's also three separate stories. And then
Okay.
they all connect at some point and shows how lives are kind of intertwined. So we're actually going to pause this recording so that Ashley can listen to them.
Okay.
But there's a couple things I want to mention before we cut because I want everyone to do the same thing. If you have that opportunity, go check out the songs first. Because first off, you should hear how Ren sings them. His just vocals add a lot to it. The videos are fantastic. And the videos are done in a one take. And they are done live. He has a
Okay.
lavalier mic and his guitar is plugged in, doing everything in the moment.
Nice.
And I think that adds a lot to how he tells the story, which is one reason I want you to watch the video so we can discuss it, and everyone else pause, go check that out. It'll be linked below. And then we can have more of an in-depth conversation about the story that he is telling through the songs.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and pause.
Gotcha. Okay. Okay. That song was kind of heavy.
It was a lot, but it's so
Yeah.
good.
I love like the actual music of it. Like we're not even looking at what the words say. Like his canter in the music is
Yes.
just really unique. I like that.
This is a big reason I've become a fan of him. And just so like everyone knows, we only watched the first story so far. We watched Jenny's Tale. But the way he does music is fascinating to me because I really love learning how to break down the structure of music. And
Yeah.
he just kind of throws everything at the wall and makes things blend that you don't think are going to.
It doesn't really feel like the chorus stands out. It's
There's
just kind
no-
of more story.
There's no chorus. It is verse
There's
after verse
kind-
after verse after verse. And then he
Yeah.
repeats the parts of the first verse and the last verse to bring the story together.
Right. And that was what I consider chorus, but it's not really like after each verse. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just kind of keeps, it's more like beat poetry.
Well, he does a lot of rapping. He's
Oh,
not
yeah.
just a rapper. He does, as you can kind of tell here, he can sing those kind of trumpet tones in the beginning. He has a very
Yeah.
good voice.
He does.
But he about a year ago released a rap record that's really good. Like really
check that
really
out.
good. But okay, yeah, I do want to say that. There's something I wanted to skip, but it's fine. So it starts off with Ren just singing with the guitar. And the song was released in 2019. So this is a little bit of an older song for him. He blew up in, I think, 2022 with a viral song called Hi Ren, which we won't get into. There's a whole, like, another major story I could tell with him and Hi Ren, but we'll stick to this one.
Okay.
But he's essentially being the narrator, and he's explaining that it was a quiet and dark night in London on an empty street, and that Jenny was walking home alone. She was just trying to get home and get to bed. And the route that she was walking that night is one that she often took, but she still felt uncomfortable on her walk.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of just inferring this from the song, but it sounds like this isn't a safe neighborhood.
Yeah.
giving her that
So, like,
uncomfortable feeling, even though it's familiar.
that's the description I got. And like the first thing I said like when we weren't recording, like, wow, this is very much Jack the Ripper.
It is.
Because
Yeah.
like all of the women that you hear in the Jack Ripper stories, they're from those neighborhoods. They know him very well. But yeah, no, it wasn't like the greatest place to be.
Exactly. And then he also explains that Jenny's life wasn't great and that she wanted to escape and leave her current life behind. And
Which
throughout
also
this,
sounds like the Jack the Ripper girls.
exactly.
That's just like the vibe I was getting.
Yeah, and I honestly, I'm kind of blown away. I never even thought of that, but you're right. Like, it really
Yeah.
is. And my brain just never made that connection.
Yeah. Well, it kind of gets blasted as soon as he gets into I want your purse and your phone. Pretty sure
Right.
those girls didn't have phones.
Right. But throughout this whole first verse, Ren is just playing the guitar and walking down an alley that's just covered in all this graffiti. And his guitar playing with his storytelling falls into the category that's now being referred to as bardcore. So he's like a bard, a Celtic storyteller with a guitar. Like, I think
Okay.
that's what a bard is. But bardcore is taking that idea and modernizing it. I
Okay.
think it started with people taking current songs and kind of turning them into a bard. But he goes the other way, essentially. He takes stories that he's making currently and puts it in that
Gotcha.
style. So it's almost like
I like
this
it.
medieval inspired guitar playing, sounds like. It's very theatrical.
Yeah, like the more I think about it, I do kind of picture that almost like medieval, rocky, underground pub. That's the noise, the music. Noise
Yeah.
is not the right word, but that's the music that I picture playing in an atmosphere like that.
Exactly. But it works. It works for the
Yes.
modern lyrics that he's telling.
Yes.
But then in the song We Switch, he then starts talking about James. He's still the narrator at this point of the story, but he's now telling the music and the story in a much more chaotic fashion. He's playing the guitar a little more aggressively. And he says
He starts talking faster.
he starts talking a lot faster. It gives you kind of a little anxiety with how he's doing it.
Which
And he
is like,
said-
I have like a lot of interest in the way movies and things are filmed. And when you're in like a chaotic area or your character is like in a chaotic state, like the cuts are faster. The camera is not like a steady cam, it's more of a handheld jiggly thing, and it's totally the same vibe.
Well, that's essentially what he did. So when he's playing and being the narrator for Jenny, the camera's just kind of slowly walking alongside of him, and he's making motions. Like, he says at one point she felt scared, and he's like glancing behind his shoulder, like checking if anyone's behind him, and the camera's just slowly walking alongside of him. And then when he transitions into discussing James, the camera moves in front of him and he starts walking faster, and the camera's now walking backward. And it
Right.
like gives you that exact feeling of the cuts, but it's still the one take. They completely changed up the filming style between each character.
And those subtle changes, they're not really meant to jar you and make you feel like, oh, wow, it's different now. But it's like in the background, and your mind knows it's different and chaotic, but you're not like seeing it.
Exactly. Yeah, it's one of those things. I've watched this video a lot. I've watched a lot of people, different like musicians or psychologists. I watch a lot of YouTube videos like analyzing this, and I've watched people who were like child protective services specialists look at this, because it's like we're talking, well, I haven't said it yet, but my next sentence in my script is we find out James is a 14-year-old boy. And so it's like they're analyzing James and kind of what James could be going through at this point. So these breakdowns are so interesting because you could have so many people from so many different kind of avenues, like medical professionals, musicians, like all of this stuff, analyze this song. It's fascinating.
Yeah. One example of like where I see a lot of this, where the camera changes and the tone changes, but the audience doesn't really pick up on it, is the opening scene for The Sixth Sense with Bruce Willis. as the
I
doctor.
haven't seen that in so long.
Yeah, but it is like we actually talked about this in a film class in college. This scene, he's with his wife in the beginning. They're having like a romantic dinner. Everything's sweet. The camera is like panned out, looking at the entire room. And then as soon as they find the man in his bathroom, the young man that shoots him, okay. I really hope at this point you've seen Sixth Sense.
See, I know what you're talking about, but I can't
Just
picture any of it.
Wrecked it. So it's not really spoiling anything because you see that he gets shot in the beginning. As soon as you see him in the bathroom, all the shots are close up. It's just their faces. It's like literally just like the width of their eyeballs. And
Okay, I think I can pick. Yeah, I think I'm remembering now.
Yeah, the camera is super jittery. It's all over the place. It's barely keeping what you want to see in frame, and it makes you so anxious. Like, what's going on? What's happening? Like, where'd he go? He just walked out, and you can't see where he's at. And the cuts are like half second, like one guy, next guy, and they're going back and forth like that. But the beginning was so smooth and romantic, and it had like just the subtlest music in it that you really don't even know that's there. And then as soon as that guy shows up, the music is loud, it's booming, it gets your heart racing, and you don't even realize what's going on.
Yeah.
And that is all done subliminally, and that's exactly what this artist did in his music video.
And I'll say, just wait, they get better. They're so good. I have this. I'm just become a huge fan, and he dove head first into his music, and it's so good. I'm addicted at the moment. But he goes into saying that at the same time Jenny is walking home, James is also walking around London alone. And as I kind of just mentioned a moment ago, James is 14. So we get a little bit more of a descriptor of James. And he says that he had just left hanging out with some friends and they were smoking weed, and that he's kind of out of his mind right now because of that.
Yeah. Which would bring that whole chaotic stance to him. Like he's also feeling like, whoa.
Exactly. And then he still gives us a little more background information. He says that James is a liar and a thief, and he sings "The devil had his sights on his soul" to really kind of convey that James is just up to no good at the age of 14.
Yeah. He must have been through it because you don't just get that from birth. Like he's been
Exactly.
He's seen things.
Well, he right after that he continues to say like James is a kid from the street, and implying that what led to his life of crime at a young age is basically growing up on the streets, and that his friends called him Screech because he was quick on his feet. And
so he's done running. He's done
exactly. My assumption is he's gotten away. Like, cops are coming, he's quick, he'll get out of there.
Yeah.
But then we jump right back into Jenny's story. So even though he's the narrator, he's completely changing the characters between how he describes them. So we're back to that soft, calm guitar, softer vocals. And he says that Jenny was scared, and maybe it was her female intuition that was raising red flags. Because she knew that walk so well. It just like she had even heightened fear that night. And then Jenny turns the corner and comes face to face with Screech.
Okay.
And then suddenly Ren changes the point of view of the song, and he now becomes Screech, which is something that's very interesting to me to like add in this extra. He's not adding in the extra character, but he is. And Screech is now robbing Jenny. He demands her purse, but she's so scared that she freezes, which is something I really like that he put in there, because I think a newer conversation is flight or fight or freeze. Like that's being acknowledged more. And it's very real. Like that's a very normal, natural reaction that you don't even necessarily have the choice to make.
Yeah, like I hear stories like, well, if that happened to me, I would totally smack the guy in the face. I'm like,
exactly.
You don't know that. Like,
yeah.
You don't probably freeze up just like I feel like I would.
I feel like the majority of response would be to freeze.
Yeah.
Because, like, your brain's probably moving 1,000 miles a minute, that everything kind of shuts off because it's overwhelmed is kind of my thought process with it. But again,
For sure.
I've never been in that situation. I don't actually know.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like, yeah, same thing. I don't know what I would do exactly, but my best instinct is that, yeah, I would freeze up.
I think I probably would. But
Yeah.
then he goes back to talking about Jenny, and he's transitioned back into the narrator. But then he quickly jumps back to Screech. So he's kind of having this conversation between the narrator and Screech, almost.
Okay. Yeah, I see that.
Yeah, which I just, that juxtaposition of characters is very interesting to me because it almost feels like a writing or like a film no where it's like you're adding in a complicated factor to it. Like,
Yeah, I think it's not the like breaking the third wall, because the third wall is like to the audience, or fourth wall. I
fourth
think.
wall.
Yeah, fourth wall. But it's, yeah, it's like pulling in someone that you don't have the background on.
Yeah,
Like,
but
there's
it
another word for that, I'm
works.
sure.
It
Yeah.
it works really well. And it's like, oh, you broke the rules, but like, good job.
Right.
But as he jumps back to Screech, Screech pulls out a knife and continues to threaten Jenny, while Jenny remains scared and frozen. And with Jenny being scared and frozen, this angers Screech. And
Yeah.
then the narrator comes back in to describe what happens next, and he says, and he swung possessed with the devil in his chest, which is goes back to the devil had the eyes on his soul line from earlier, which I really loved.
Yeah. Yeah, so the devil is the one reacting to this right now. That's his instinct of being the naughty boy.
Yeah, like the devil is just kind of the evil that is inside of him, and waiting for that moment for him to do
Yeah.
something like this. And then the song ends with Jenny lying on the cold concrete, and the last line kind of in that verse is she found somewhere to sleep. And so it kind of started with she was just trying to go home and trying to go to sleep, but she ended up finding it on the cold concrete as she's
Yeah.
dying.
Yeah.
So just to kind of give a general summary before moving on to the next one, we have Jenny walking home at night, Screech walking home at night. They come across each other. Screech attempts to rob Jenny and ends up stabbing and murdering her. So that's kind of our crime within the first song.
Okay. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Jenny's Tale?
I feel like you're really pulled into it because you feel related to each character, and he did that by like the film style. So I really hope that everyone who's seeing this or hearing this the first time is actually watching it as well, because that is a huge element of it.
That's why I'm like, we're pausing because you're watching this live. I need your reaction.
Yeah. And the being pulled into it like that, it makes you want more.
And I'm so glad it's a trilogy because, like, luckily we get more.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead and pause and watch Screech's Tale, and we can kind of see where things go from there. I'm good.
Okay.
Whenever you are.
Okay. So you just watched the second video. Definitely much heavier than the first one.
Yeah. I think it's a lot heavier because you get a little bit more insight into Screech.
Yeah.
Because
And
this is after the murder.
Yeah, and he's like a scared kid. Like, we knew that he was
Exactly.
14, and it starts off being so dark, and that's basically like his feeling. And then it's like he's reaching out for help.
Yeah, because the song starts off, he's just playing another kind of medieval inspired melody on the guitar that like in the beginning it kind of feels romantic, I think. And then he gets into a more chaotic rhythm with his guitar. Like it's sped up a little bit, and then it starts to build that anxious feeling from the first one.
Definitely.
And then once he starts singing, he's the narrator again and jumps directly into that moment that Screech had killed Jenny.
Yeah, and
And-
he's freaking out.
Exactly. He runs to a friend's house, which is nearby.
Patrick.
Yes, Patrick. And one thing I really love at this point is, and I don't think it's like this in the recording. I think this is the one take video that has this. But he pauses on the guitar and literally starts knocking on it as if he's knocking on Patrick's door.
Yeah, I didn't see that in
And
this video, but that like there's a couple other places where he used the guitar more than just like the typical guitar string.
yes, we'll wait till we get to the end part because I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
But like he literally just stops playing and knocks, and it's a rhythmic knock too because he's still keeping on the beat and everything. And then he starts strumming in the pattern of the knock, and the camera starts spinning around him because he's pounding on this door, he's panicking, and it's still another one take video. So as we were kind of saying in that first one, you need to create that sense of panic and chaos. So the camera's literally going in a big circle around him in this moment. But he just keeps knocking on his door and Patrick's not home. And you get that immersive feeling moment, and it just kind of like makes you sad. Where it's like,
Yeah.
you know what he just did is so terrible, but you can tell that his panic is also remorse.
Yeah, he's definitely wanting help, and then like is that we know he did a crappy thing, but you feel bad for him.
Exactly. He's a 14-year-old kid.
Yeah.
And then eventually Screech gives up trying to knock on Patrick's door, realizing he's not there, and he calls his girlfriend.
Yeah, and then he's starting
And-
off sweet with her too.
Well, this was exactly, and this is another super interesting break in the song because again, he stops playing the guitar and he literally pulls his phone out of his pocket to reenact this call. And
Yeah.
he's basically saying like, "Hey, can I come by your place?" And I'm assuming she's another 14-year-old kid, and she's just like, "No, I'm busy." Like, can't. And then he goes off and he starts screaming at her.
Yeah. He's a master
hangs up on her.
manipulator.
Exactly. Yeah, and so he's just like he's a master manipulator, but he's also realized like that option's not gonna work. Like,
Yeah.
what am I gonna do? And he's panicking. So then he hangs up on her, and then I love this little part of it because this is the storytelling in it where he literally like pauses and takes a breath.
Yeah, I
And
actually
then
like wrote a
calmly
little
picks
note
up
like
as
that
the
breath.
narrator. Yeah, you're showing him from behind, so he is like straightens up his shoulders and just takes a deep breath, and then starts playing the guitar as the narrator. Like it's
Yeah.
just fascinating.
Which makes me kind of wonder about like what mental illness does he have where he can stop an entire feeling and like start over?
Well, I can get into that if you want me to. I wasn't going to, but I can.
I feel like that is bipolar.
So, okay. This is going to be a side tangent on Ren.
Okay.
So Ren, when he was late teens or so, he's in his mid 30s right now. I think he's right around my age.
Okay.
He had got Lyme's disease, but he is from Wales, and Lyme's disease is not common in Wales, so it went undiagnosed and misdiagnosed for like 8 or 9 years.
Oh.
And it caused brain damage, and he had pretty severe psychotic episodes where he thought he was potentially, I think, like given Lyme's by the government for study. Like
Oh.
it turned into this really severe.
Yeah, that's a
Psycho-
psychotic break.
Yeah. So he has now been treated for Lyme's, but he deals with really severe autoimmunity.
Okay.
And he went through stem cell treatment, which had a positive impact, but he's still going through all sorts of treatments for his autoimmunity and brain damage.
Yeah, brain damage, I
So-
don't know how much you can fix. So like if he's having psychotic episodes where he's actually having delusions. I don't know.
It doesn't sound like he's going through any sort of psychotic episodes now. It sounds like that was luckily not terribly long that he was
Okay.
going through that. But like if you watch Hyren, if you watch a lot of his other videos, he has a song called Sick Boy, and his album is called Sick Boy, where it's like he kind of really breaks down a lot of what he's gone through.
Okay.
Which it's just fascinating because it's like, holy cow, how are you still making some awesome stuff and using that as like fuel for the fire?
So what it's like is that he like went through all this, but he recovered enough where he can like still function and do everything he needs to do, which is like excellent. Like there's recovery available for all of these things, but he remembers it, so he's able to portray it in this character.
Yes, and he's still struggling with it pretty severely, unfortunately. He actually, I was just looking the other day. He's about to release a new song because he has a new album prepared, but his health has been really, really bad.
Oh.
And he's been waiting to release it, and he just put a post up, I think 2 or 3 days ago, saying like, my health isn't bad. I need to pick me up. Here's a song because like releasing music makes me feel good.
That's
so
good.
like maybe this will help me type of thing. But he can't tour. He can't do that sort of stuff. But his music's incredible. Like this is a tiny fraction of what this man can do.
That's awesome that he can do that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, I like his story's just been fascinating to me, but also like every song sounds different from each other. So his catalog you just can listen to over and over because it's just so good and such a good variety.
Yeah.
So now you have a little more insight into that. There's a lot more that could be said. He has a whole, I think he calls them the chapters on YouTube. He has like 7 or 8 episodes where he talks for like 20 minutes about points in his life, but as you can kind of see with the way he writes in these songs, he packs so much information into a very small amount of time that those like 20-minute episodes, you're going through like 5 or 6 years of his life and you get it in detail.
Wow.
So I highly recommend it if you're interested in that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I'll check that out.
It's very fascinating. But back to the tale of Jenny and Screech. He's yelling at his girlfriend. He has this moment to like collect himself and become the narrator. And the guitar picks up again and he tells us that sirens are approaching. I'm assuming these are sirens for Jenny.
That's what it sounds like.
That's my just implied thought.
Yeah.
He doesn't say it specifically, but it makes sense.
Yeah.
And as we've been kind of saying, James is not thinking straight. Or Screech is not thinking straight.
Mm-hmm.
And he decides to turn towards the police with his knife in hand.
Yeah.
And begins screaming at him. And he says, I am Screech. I am the boss here. I am the ender of men. And he starts to run towards an officer.
Not smart, man.
No. And so the narrator then gives us another point of view. And he jumps to telling the story from the cop's point of view. Which, again, is just a very interesting, like, character change to me that works.
He's another human involved in this whole thing.
Mm-hmm. And the officer's name is Richard, and Richard basically just sees a 14-year-old boy running at him with a knife, so he shoots him 4 times in the chest.
Yeah.
And this is that other pause guitar moment. That is fantastic.
Yeah. I get that officer is another human, probably another younger, not 14-year-old, but like a person in their 20s.
Young man. Yeah.
And that is terrifying as well. Like you can be a big tough cop, but you're still like, holy shit, like this is gonna be my life too.
And it also like, well, first let's describe the guitar moment. So he stops playing the guitar, but then he pulls it up and holds it like a gun and muffles his strings, so when he strums it just quickly ends, and he does it 4 times to represent the 4 gunshots.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about earlier. It's like he uses the guitar for more than just like the strumming noise that we're familiar with.
And something that is very, very interesting to me, and you know a little bit more about the structure of film than I do, but this seems like another no-no that I think is like the perfect choice. The cameraman becomes Screech.
Yeah.
Because
so
every single time the strum happens for one of the gunshots, the camera kind of like jolts. And then that 4th one, it falls to the ground. And
it's another way of pulling you into things.
It is. But it feels like it's one of those things where it's like you're completely changing perspective.
Oh, completely.
Of what you're watching, which you aren't supposed to do.
And not to pull in more analogies and things, but another, not a show that breaks this fourth wall is The Office that everyone's familiar with every time that I know you
I don't
probably didn't watch The Office much.
You know I don't like The Office.
You don't, but it is so popular that I think people will understand this fourth wall concept. So like when you're watching a show, like a general sitcom, they never look at the camera. The characters, that fourth wall is the audience is that wall. So you like when you're on a sitcom stage, there's 3 walls each side in the back wall. And the fourth one, they just don't even acknowledge that it exists. When you're watching Friends, no one knows what's on the other side of Monica's living room, but you just know it's there. That wall is the audience wall. In The Office, they pull that fourth wall out, and Jim, one of the main characters, will frequently talk directly at you or look at you because that show is meant to be documentary style. They call it mockumentary. So yeah, it's filmed like a sitcom, but then like they pull them out and put them in the talking head room, and they're like they don't hear the end of it. Like you assume a producer is asking him a question, like, Jim, what did you think about what just happened? He's like, this was bullshit. And
that's like reality TV style.
Yes. But that pulls you into it, and then you're watching this as if you're the documentarian, and that makes you feel related. And then like everyone talks about, like, well, everyone but you, because you're the one that doesn't watch The Office.
I tried. I just can't. I've tried numerous times.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like, I can't get into certain things that are, like, popular, too, but to each their own. But the people that watch The Office are related to Jim and Pam, like, the 2 characters that are, like, forming a romance, and that is, like, a huge thing for the show itself. But you want that to happen because you feel like those 2 are your friends now because they talked right at you. And when Ren is doing this to you as like a victim and someone that's pulled into it, now you're like, that guy just shot me. Like, what the hell? And you feel what that guy felt.
Well, there's something that was really interesting to me because I actually, just a couple days ago, I signed up for his Patreon.
Okay.
And he has a video on there where he breaks down the lyrics of Screech's Tale.
Oh.
And it's only like a 10-minute video, but as I was just kind of saying, this man can pack a lot in a very short period of time.
Yeah.
But he talked a lot about the fascination with the anti-hero and the reason they become the anti-hero. So with Screech, like that's kind of how he related to it and why I think we became Screech at the end. But he liked that, like, Screech isn't a good person. He makes terrible, life-ending decisions, but there's that underlying curiosity as to how he came to make those decisions. And that's the captivating part of it.
Yeah.
Because you want to kind of get into his mind to understand, well, in the end, you become him. So you're in his mind a little bit more.
Yeah.
So recap of the 2. Jenny's walking home, comes across Screech, 14-year-old boy. He robs her. Robbery didn't go as planned. He stabs her, murders her. Screech goes running off after the murder to a friend's place. Friend isn't home. He has nowhere else to go. Assumingly, he's mentally unstable at this point, in some sort of manic state, regardless of kind of whether it's actually a mental disorder or not. He's in this manic state.
Right.
He confronts a police officer who is described in the song as being 6'3", and he's a 14-year-old boy running at him, and the officer shoots and kills Screech 1 block from where he killed Jenny.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on Screech's Tale?
I feel like it really pulled you into relating Jenny and Screech as, like, especially that last line where, like, they are 1 block from each other. Like, those 2 stories are very similar. But in the beginning, you didn't feel that. You felt like, oh, this nasty kid shot this girl in cold blood. Then you get into that he died as well. I'm like, oh, well, that's tragic. And he was so scared and something was happening, and he reacted in a way that, like you said, the devil inside him was doing the things. It was almost like someone else that when he charged the cop with a knife. Yeah. But then I'm also like thinking this poor cop is like in the same boat.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, you now have an extra person that is a part of the story that was forced to murder somebody.
Yeah.
Which is almost what it feels like Screech did, but he wasn't forced, but it was adrenaline, and it was kind of his brain pushing him to do it, even though he might not have wanted to.
Yeah, like the devil inside him didn't know another way to react because that's all he's ever known.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and get into our last song, which is Violet's Tale, which will close out this trilogy.
Okay.
So let's go ahead and pause and do that.
Okay, so that third one is like a whole nother story.
Yes.
Yeah, at first I'm like, Violet, like, did I miss a character? And then it's like, oh no, this is totally different.
Yeah, and I think before we kind of get into the story of it, I think this is the most intricate video of the three. It's another one shot
Yep.
with live audio, but he used his acoustics more than he used in the other ones.
Yeah, like from going to room, the acoustics
Yeah.
change.
Like he's in this hallway at one point, and we'll kind of get to it because I do kind of have that broken down because it adds so much emotion.
Yeah.
But he's in this hallway, and it's just like ominous sounding, and just adds that creepy factor to it.
Makes you feel like, well, Violet's lonely.
Yeah. And I meant to say this in the last one specifically with Screech's Tale, but he's just recording these in the middle of the night. He doesn't have permission to record in a lot of places he does. So he's just walking down the streets screaming some of this stuff, especially in Screech's Tale, in the
Yeah.
middle of the night in an alley.
Yeah, like guerrilla style shooting.
Yeah. He talked about in one video, because he does a lot of live streams. So when he releases a song, he does a live stream and like breaks it down. And we talked in one of them about how there were people like yelling out their windows at him during Jenny's Tale, and he had to like redo it a handful of times. But it makes the video so good.
Yeah.
But we start out in a hospital room, and Ren is on a bed playing his guitar in a hospital gown, and he's playing another melody. And this one to me feels like it's at a Ren fair. Like,
Yeah, it sounds very Irish or medieval.
yes,
Is he Irish?
he's Welsh.
Welsh, okay.
But he then does this finger picking technique that feels very chaotic and builds up anticipation and tension. And then he slows down and starts harmonizing with this very soft vocal with his guitar, which it just sounds haunting.
Yeah.
And then he begins to tell Violet's story. He again starts as the narrator, letting us know that we're in London in 2005, and a woman from Paddington is fighting for her life, and she's in the hospital. But before we get more information, he says the only way you can actually understand her story is to rewind. And then he does this like reverse scale on the guitar as you're like rewinding sound.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds just like a rewind.
And we learn that Violet was a quiet girl who grew up in a violent home. Her mother was an alcoholic, and her father would sexually abuse her. And her mother would know about this abuse, but she never would step in to help.
Yeah.
And
she was probably being abused as well.
probably. And Violet was able to move out at 16 years old and live off of welfare and a job stocking shelves at a grocery store just to make ends meet. And she meets a man named Stevie, who she fell hard for, but unfortunately, Stevie would repeat the cycle that she had gone through with her father.
Yeah, and I hear stories like this frequently. 'Cause that's the only love you think you know.
Exactly. It's what you understand. It's what you've
Yeah.
experienced. And even though it's awful, it's also comfortable.
Yeah.
And throughout this part of the song, when he's talking about Violet's father leading up to Stevie, is when he's in that hallway. And to have that like extra like dark and ominous feel when you're literally talking about a father abusing his child is just like so heavy.
Yeah, and it, like I said earlier, it makes you feel like Violet's alone. It's like because she felt alone.
Yeah. Yeah, the people that were around her didn't actually care for her if they're treating her like that.
Right. So she feels like I could feel like anyone else that had the strength that knew there was people around them to support would stand up and get the help they need, but she didn't have that option. She didn't feel like there was anyone to help her. So yeah, that lonely feeling is
And she's a kid.
horrible. Yeah, she doesn't know what to do. She's never been experienced, or never had experienced anyone wanting to be on her side.
Exactly. And then he makes the first jump into a voice of one of the characters in the story. And he's quickly now jumping between Stevie and the narrator. And it's like one line Stevie, one line narrator, just back and forth. And he uses the door, because this whole time he's like walking through this building. And he gets to the door and he puts his face like right up against it so it's muffled. And he knocks on it. And this is Stevie knocking on Violet's door, trying to wake her up.
Yeah.
And he cuts the music, he cuts the guitar, and you find out that Stevie has been drinking and smoking, and he gets very angry when he does this. And he has violent tendencies when he's intoxicated. And Violet always remains silent. That's kind of what we really know about her consistently throughout the whole story.
Yeah. Because again, she can't speak up. She doesn't know where to go.
Exactly. And I'm assuming that she's partially staying silent because, like, she just wants him to go away. So pretend to sleep. But he doesn't. He forces her up and he begins to hit her. And again, through all of this, there's no guitar. This is just like a narration, but it's still musical.
Yeah, it's kind of back to that like beat poetry thing like I felt in Jenny's story in the beginning.
Exactly. But then he does end up picking up the guitar, but he kind of does a similar thing he does in Screech's Tale, where he muffles the strings and does a few fast strums, which he's saying is the sound of his beating fists.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like almost percussion instead of rhythmic.
Exactly. And then he goes into a quick succession of lyrics that is describing this beating.
Yeah, and the beating is going at the tempo of his voice.
Which is much faster than the rest of the song.
Yeah.
And then he kind of concludes it with the beating of Stevie realizing the situation that he just caused. And it's him and the narrator just going back and forth, where Stevie is screaming at her to speak up and get up. And the narrator just keeps repeating, Violet remains silent.
Yeah.
And then it's
like I almost
screaming
see
and
the
then silence.
words. Like if the lyrics were on a piece of paper, I see those parts in like parentheses.
Yeah, it's like that's the description of what the actor should be doing.
Yeah. Like I see it like a screenplay script.
And then we fast forward. So we do the opposite of what he had done earlier with the rewind. We fast forward through the scale on the guitar. And he starts it again with how he started the song. London,
Yeah, so we're back to the
2005,
bed.
in Paddington. We're not physically there, but
Yeah.
visually he has put us back there with his lyrics.
Yes.
And she's in the hospital after the beating from Stevie, and the doctors are reacting to the fact that Violet was 9 months pregnant when she came into the hospital.
Yeah, which we didn't hear in the beginning. Now we're learning
Exactly. And this is also the first time we hear Violet speak, and she pleads with the doctors to prioritize her baby's life over her own.
this. Yeah.
And then this is essentially the end of the song. It basically concludes with Violet's death, but the birth of two twins, one named Jenny and one named Screech.
It's crazy.
So what are your thoughts on all of that?
I feel like the entire story all put together, being that everyone in the story has like an inner monster or inner something making them do things, but for different reasons. So maybe not all monsters. Maybe some of them are just a inner monologue. But they all kind of get caught with the same result.
Yeah.
Like even the guy, Stevie, beating Violet, he's doing this under a state of influence, drugs, alcohol, whatever. And when he realizes she is still silent, she's not coming back, at the end of the beating, he's like, wait, shit, you are silent. Why are you silent? Not like yelling at her anymore. Why are you silent? Why aren't you talking to me? Like, what? Speak up. And he's like, oh, wait, fuck. She's not talking. Why are you silent? Different question, even though it's the same words.
To me, go ahead. Finish.
His demeanor is going back to like his natural state of like, maybe he is a good person in general, and he was like, he fucked up again.
I think you're getting to exactly what my thoughts are, but I think there's a slightly different twist on it. But I think you're there.
They all have like the goal to be good originally, and something influenced them to do something different, whether it be the loneliness of like a kid on the streets, or I don't really know exactly. Like Jenny's is a little bit different, but Violet didn't know any better to better herself by getting herself out of a situation because she didn't know how, because of how she was raised. Stevie's, we don't hear a lot of his background, but we relate him to Violet's dad. Probably the same kind of thing. And even the cop is like, this is going to affect me for the rest of my life, but I had to do it because of my job, my career, and my goal to protect the world. Mm-hmm. But they all are living with this tragic thing that happened.
Well, I think a really big part of it, too, that he's trying to emphasize is it's a cycle. Because Stevie and Violet are Jenny and Screech's parents.
Yes.
Jenny takes after Violet staying silent. Screech takes after Stevie with his aggression.
Yes.
And so with Stevie killing Violet at the end, obviously Violet's not in the kids' lives. And you would assume that Stevie's probably going to prison. So Stevie's not in their lives either. So my assumption is they went into foster care. And so now
they didn't know each other.
They didn't know each other. They had no clue they were twins, but they
Which just reminds me then, I just didn't even realize until just now, Jenny's 14 too.
Exactly. And I've watched some clips where Ren breaks a lot of this down, and he's like, I was very intentional about not saying her age, but like,
yeah,
if you listen to it, everything that is said about her can absolutely fit a 14-year-old.
Yeah, everything.
But it's the conversation of, is this nature versus nurture? But there's more factors in that, because your argument would be that it's nature since they weren't raised with their parents who had these same attributes. But then it's like, okay, well, now you need to question the system. Is the system also causing that? Is that nurture?
Yes. That's where I'm at. I think it's definitely a nurture thing, but nature feels like nature because the environment that they're in is almost inevitable because the system is broken. Mm-hmm. There's you don't get the little Orphan Annie stories where this little girl gets picked up and put into a mansion and raised with all of the amenities given to her.
Right.
That doesn't happen. So while the system is getting this child a home, it's probably not getting him Daddy Warbucks.
Exactly. Yeah. So like that's one thing why the ending of the song, like it's kind of a fantastical ending in the aspect of like, okay, they're twins. Holy cow.
Yeah.
But I think it creates a really great conversation with that, because I think you're right. The system is really messed up. And like the goal is to have the system fully functioning. So we can't properly analyze whether it was nature versus nurture due to that, because both are very potentially a factor, if not one over the other, that we just can't tell.
Right.
But in the breakdown, when I was researching all of this and I was watching all these different clips of Ren talking about the creation of this story, it all stemmed from him reading an article about a 14-year-old boy who stabbed somebody. So it actually came from him just reading the news, and then he created the whole story. The article wasn't about a 14-year-old boy stabbing a 14-year-old girl. It was just
right,
kind of that inspired all of this that came from Ren's imagination. But it is just fascinating how it's like all woven together in this storyteller fashion with that medieval guitar kind of thrown in. It kind of feels like a modern twist on just an old story you might hear someone playing in the corner of a pub.
Right. And so many of those like old pub stories and things are very similar storylines.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, very fascinating.
But what are your thoughts on the three as a whole now that you've seen them all?
Like, I think that the analysis that we have where they're making all these tragic stories based off of inner demons, places, people, things that came from their childhood makes sense with it being full circle. It's like, well, obviously they all kind of came to the same result because they all kind of came from the same place.
Exactly.
And even if they didn't all come from the same place, like same literal womb, they come from the same neighborhood, same community, and there's this full cycle thing happens over and over and over. And while we want to like nip crime in the butt and we're gonna fix all the problems by sending all these kids to better schools, like it's not just one thing to be fixed. There's so much to be fixed.
And it's not a uniform solution place to place.
No, everything needs to be taken case on case basis. There's not one solution to any of these things. Each case by case basis probably has 10 items that need to be repaired to make it better. And I don't think there is any way to fix it. We are going to have crime. We're going to have shitty stories. We're going to have people in tragic situations no matter what you do. The best we can do is trying to curb it and come with a way to maybe knock down a majority of it and then look for recovery ways and helpful ways to get people through what's there.
Yeah, it's understanding what's causing the crime and if there's ways to help impact that to make things better so the crime isn't as necessary for people.
Yeah.
Like that would make a huge
mental
difference.
Health needs help. That's, I feel like 90% of what's going on.
Yeah.
But that is huge. How do you just fix that?
Exactly. And that's a big reason I'm a fan of Ren, I think, is because, and he talks about this a lot in his live streams and stuff, where he's like, I don't have any answers, but I see problems. So I'm going to talk about what I'm seeing, and maybe collectively as people, we can actually think of a solution because we're a smart society, but we actually have to work together to make that happen.
Yeah. Awareness is huge.
And
just awareness of the situation is a start.
A majority of his, well, not a majority, that's a lot of his music.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm a big fan, because I think it's a really great conversation. And he's great at writing lyrics. So the way he presents that conversation, I think is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he doesn't have the answers, which I don't either. And I don't know if anyone does. There's someone out there that might just have like one harebrained idea to help one part of one situation, but they wouldn't come up with the idea and be like forthcoming with it until you hear over and over about how this is an actual problem.
Or
so the awareness
5 people have pieces of that idea. They just got to come together and figure it out.
Yeah.
But that is the tale of Jenny and Screech and Violet. I will also say, in some of his recent stuff that he has posted, he has talked about he's writing some new tales. And I'm very excited. It sounds like it'll be on the next album. And like I said earlier, his album that he released a year ago is a rap album. He has already come out to say that his next album he's releasing is much more musical and rock-like. So I'm very excited for that. I don't know any more information. That was what was just posted a few days ago. So I'm excited. I will definitely be checking it out. I hope you are a fan of Ren now.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check out more of his stuff. I've always loved a good cross-genre thing, and I feel like this is one of those for sure.
I just, like, I'm right now, I realize this with the Gordon Lightfoot song as well. All of these songs, they're not your typical song structure, and I think I'm just really into that right now as well, where it's like, it literally is a story from start to end. There's no chorus. There's none of that. Yeah. And I think right now that that's what I want out of music.
Yeah, because I do like a storytelling. Anything like, oh gosh, Bohemian Rhapsody. That's
right.
Yeah, those are the best songs.
Theatrical. It feels like we just watched. That was a 13-minute video. It feels like we watched a play.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, for sure.
But hopefully, if he releases new tales, I will happily do another one of these episodes.
Yeah.
So I'll be anxiously waiting for that. But thank you all for listening to Have You Heard About This Case? If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or you can follow our show on Spotify. You can find us on YouTube at Have You Heard About This Case, on Instagram at Have You Heard About This Case Pod, on TikTok at HYHATC, or you can email us at haveyouheardaboutthiscase@gmail.com. Thanks, and we'll talk to you later.
Goodbye.